have no intention of getting in the way of Manu's airtime. I'm grabbing the mic just to make sure Sharmishta gets credit for originating the idea of this talk. I think we saw Manu on campus and we were like, you have to do this. And I think Manu's fan base is clearly showing, so I don't think he needs an introduction really, but we are delighted to have Professor Manu from Ashoka University and Twitter meme lord. Please take it away, all yours.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Neelhara. And again, let me sort of give my heartfelt appreciation to Neelhara and actually to Sharmishta, who kind of pushed me into, for pushing me into doing something like this. So, I've been sort of doing this Twitter thing for, I don't know, a year, maybe year and a half or so. Something just around the time when the pandemic started. And it was started out mostly as something to sort of kill the time when you're online and, after you're done with doing whatever it is that you're doing, you have some time to kill what it is that you do, right? So then I started trying to find a creative outlet for all the time, extra time that I seem to have. But anyways, that being set aside, first, before I get into this sort of a serious message via a non-serious medium, let me just sort of try to start on at a much lighter note. Right. So when I started preparing these slides yesterday, I sort of asked myself, why am I giving this talk in the first place? Why do this? Right. So this is what I could come up with. Like, okay, bhai. And I tend to switch into vernacular. So everybody here comfortable with Hindi? Every once in a while? Anybody, if you're not comfortable, just let me know. I'll try to avoid Hindi. So the idea was, okay, it seems like I have something that people want to hear about. So let me kind of try and give out some gyan. Right? Okay. Why academic memes? People are doing a lot of memes, right? I mean, if you go on to Twitter, this is all that you see. There's a lot of memes on pretty much everything under the sun. But one thing that was missing, so if you go out, look at professors in the US, they've been doing this for a while. There was this very nice niche that I thought I could fill, which is essentially trying to convey the idiosyncrasies of academic life using Bollywood meme. I tried doing some of that and it seemed like, people seemed to enjoy it. So I did a bit more of that. I pushed my luck with, sort of walking very thinly on the line between offensive and funny. And I think I've managed to do that pretty well for now. But anyways, the idea was, okay, there is something that people want to hear about. So let me try and address that, right? Anyways, another thing that people have asked me, it's like, okay, how do you come up with these memes, right? And one of the things that I wanted to just quickly talk about is what my creative process is like. And it's a very simple 4-step process that I have sort of honed over the last year and a half. Your mileage, of course, may vary when you're trying to do this sort of a thing. So the first step to sort of creating memes in academia is sit at home and suffer through a global pandemic. And that seems to somehow let your creative juices flow a little bit. First, okay, so we suffer through a global pandemic. Second one, okay, go on, have a kid. Why not? Suffering through a global pandemic anyways, if you have a kid, I mean, you having sleepless nights, might as well add some fun to that, right? Okay, so now you have 2 very solid reasons to not sleep at night. Okay, excellent. What do you do with all this free time? Right? Okay, so you go on to Google and you figure out, all these meme templates that are floating around for Bollywood. And you figure out, okay, there are all these meme templates. And the final step that remains is essentially tying all these meme templates to your academic experiences so far, right? So look at all these templates. By the way, I have not seen a lot of the movies that I make these memes on. I just sort of extrapolate based on the dialogues that I see. But anyways, so I have had a bunch of academic experiences through PhD and through being an academic for the past 5 or so years. And when you tie them together, you come up with these supposedly hilarious things, right? So that's sort of what my creative process is. I mean, so far it's been working well. We'll see how that goes in the long term, right? Anyways, this is something that I had read in a while ago, and I don't know who the author is, and I'm pretty sure I'm paraphrasing over here. But then tragedy in hindsight makes for best comedy, and I'll won't comment on any of that, and especially given the current context. But read this particular statement however you might want to, right? Anyways, so before we get into the meat of the talk, so to say, let me put out this fair warning. So again, the way I have kind of structured these talks, because it was sort of short notice, is I have kind of plagiarized from my past self, right? So I just went onto my Twitter timeline. By the way, how many of you are computer scientists over here? Anybody major in computer science? Anybody writing code? Okay. So whoever it is, please go take a job with Twitter. Help them, make their search functionality better. It's terrible, right? And especially if you're on short notice, it's very, very bad. So please, I think they need good engineers. Anyways, so I kind of plagiarized from my past self. I just sort of took screenshots of what I have posted previously and tried to sort of give a message out of it. And sometimes it might come out as a little bit borderline offensive, just because I seem to have very strong opinions about certain things. So by far, and this is something that somebody called out to me about 6 months ago or so. It's like I've not been accused of not having an opinion so far. So anyways, okay. So what I'm going to sort of try and talk about is, and some of these things I know where they came from, right? So anybody know where this particular thing came from? This screenshot? No? Wow. Anybody seen Patal Lok? I think it's in Prime Video, right? Yeah. So that's where this thing came from, right? And the goal of today's talk is to sort of try and convey what I have learned over the past, 15 years or so, 6 years, or not 15 years, yeah, 15 years or so, 6 years in grad school, 5 years being in industry, 5 years being in academia, of how to do well in a PhD program, based on my experience from both sides of the table, right? So you don't want to be this person. If you're a PhD student, you don't want to be stuck in grad school for 15 years. And what I'll try to do through all these memes that I have is essentially try to give you the gyan that I have to not be the person who gets stuck in grad school for 15 years, right? So anyways, this is sort of what the executive summary is. This is what if you take nothing else from this talk, except for, maybe some entertainment from the memes, this is what I want you to take away, and I'll address each one of these things every once in a while, right? So first things first, and I'm not going to read through this. I kind of hate text on slides anyway, so I'll go with this. Give it a second, right? So you see a bunch of kind of people pointing different ways, right? If you are doing a PhD, the first thing that you should sort of imbibe from the get-go, it's your PhD, right? It's not your advisor's PhD, it's not your teammates or your group leader's PhD, it's your PhD, which essentially means that you have to kind of end up taking ownership for everything that you do, right? I mean, it's okay to start out slow, sort of learn all the skills that you need to learn to be able to do a successful PhD, but at the end of the day, the papers that you write, the experiments that you do, the dissertation that you write, the talks that you give, they are all yours. They're not your advisors, not anybody else's. So, rule number one, your PhD should own up responsibility for almost everything that you do, right? So, in a group meeting, for example, when somebody asks who was responsible for running that particular experiment, if it was you should raise up your hand and say, yeah, it was me. I screwed up. Didn't do it one time. Anyways, okay. This is the next thing that you all should remember, right? Everybody knows this? Where is this from? Huh? Family Man, exactly. Right? I think it's season 2. It's season 2, right? Yeah. Huh. So, don't be a minimum guy, right? I mean, guy is just being sort of being used because that's where the dialogue is from. But then essentially the idea here is that you kind of have to go beyond the call of duty to be able to do a good PhD, right? I mean, and again, I'll sort of come back to this point every once in a while, but the idea is, if you want to end up doing a good PhD, you cannot be the person who's doing the bare minimum that is supposed to be done to graduate or whatever it is that your advisor asks you to do, right? So anytime that you think about, oh, how do I make sure that I'll be able to do a good PhD? This is one thing that is something that you can potentially try to say to yourself every once in a while. Right? So the rest of the talk is sort of structured along the lines of I'll have a meme, I'll talk a little bit about it, and I'll try to kind of put out this larger level message. Right? Okay. Anybody knows who this is? Huh? Yeah, Ashneer Grover, right? Shark Tank India. So all the rage these days apparently. The reason I find out about these things is because I Google for meme templates and these guys come up. Right? Then I found out, oh, there's something called Shark Tank India. Anyways, I had no idea who Ashneer Grover was about 2 weeks ago. But here he is now on my Twitter timeline. So, one of the key things that you'd have to sort of keep in mind while being a PhD student is essentially you have to do both, right? You have to, as a PhD student, you are responsible for generation of new knowledge, which essentially means you have to sit down and think, right? You have to read a whole bunch of stuff, figure out where the gaps in knowledge are, and think about how can you sort of fill in those gaps. And the only way you can fill in those gaps is by doing something, right? I mean, if you are in a discipline that requires you to just write opinions about things, that's perfectly fine, but then you have to sit down and write those opinions. If you are in an experimental field that requires you to generate experimental data, that's equally fine, but you'll have to sit down and do those experiments, generate the data, do the analysis, plot the graphs, write it up, the whole shebang. But anyways, what I essentially mean to say is there's two components, right? One, you have to sort of sit down, think about it, and then the next thing is you have to do sort of, little bit more action-oriented things based on what you have thought about, right? Okay. Since I'm here, I'll just quickly talk about this very small sort of thing in Sanskrit that I remember from my school days, very long time ago, right? But it goes something along the lines of Udyamenim siddhanti karyanina manorathai nahi suptasya singhasya pravachanti mukhyamika. I don't know much of Sanskrit, but this is something that just stuck in my head. What that essentially means is even deer don't go and give themselves up into the mouths of the lion. The lion has to work hard to feed himself. That's essentially what it is. I'm trying to say over here is, if you want to sort of do good work, you'll have to essentially do good work, right? Okay. So, and doing good work is something that requires a bit of planning, right? Management is something that is kind of looked down in academia. It's like, oh, okay, ये तो MBA वालों का काम है, हम नहीं करेंगे. If you want to do good work, and given the fact that you have only so much time in a PhD, you'll have to sort of plan things out, not just by yourself, but maybe in conjunction with your advisor, maybe in conjunction with your, research group, something. But you can't just be randomly doing things, right? I mean, it has to be focused towards a goal. You have, let's say, a research problem that you're working towards, right? You have a hypothesis that you want to test out. Then you have to design experiments to be able to test out that hypothesis, right? It requires some fair amount of planning. You can't just be randomly doing experiments trying to sort of see. It's like throwing pasta on the wall and see what sticks. Sometimes that works. Most of the time it doesn't. So 3 things: you have to think, you have to do, and before you start doing stuff, you have to sort of plan it out a little bit. So you're able to utilize whatever time you have in grad school a little bit, right? Okay. I don't know who this guy is, but he comes up in Shark Tank a whole lot, right? Apparently, he owns this boat company, the headphones thing. Anyways, right? If you talk to first year PhD students, and I was there, right? I mean, I have said these exact same things. Like I did my PhD in computer architecture. I read a couple of papers on the first, and I said, "Oh, simulator ये तो मैं कल बना दूंगा." 3 साल लगे, right? So the point is, whatever it is that we think we would be able to do, we almost always end up overestimating what we'll be able to do in a given amount of time, right? Almost always, especially in PhD programs, right? It's like when you're in a PhD program, and I remember being that way, right? I remember being, "Arey, मैं तो सब कर दूंगा," right? I mean, I have read papers on storage, I have read papers on memory, I have read papers on pipeline optimization. I will do all of this, right? The fact of the matter is, if I want to graduate in my lifetime, I can't do all of this, right? I want to sort of pick one thing and do the best I can. So we always tend to overestimate how much we can achieve in a given amount of time. And we have to sort of be realistic about things. And again, it might not come sort of automatically to you, which essentially means that you'll have to sit down with somebody who'd be able to take the things that you want to do and create something realistic out of it, which is typically your advisor, right? So advisor or somebody whom you want to go and you trust them about talking about these things. Right. So again, all of us, especially during the early stages of a PhD program, we tend to overestimate how much it is that we can do in a given amount of time, and which is perfectly fine. It's absolutely essential to be enthusiastic in a PhD program. Right? I mean, there is no point in being somebody who's doing a PhD just because they are doing a PhD. You have to be enthusiastic about doing things, but then you have to make sure that you couple that enthusiasm with a little bit of realism, so that you're able to achieve as much as you can in the 5 or 6 years that you have in the PhD program, right? This is one of my favorite topics, right? One of my favorite topics about advisors and advisees, right? And it gets a fair bit of discussion, especially on Twitter, about what the relationship between advisors and advisees should be. I look at it as actually what it is. It's a relationship. Right? I mean, you and your advisor are going to be in a 5, 6, 7 year long relationship. And you don't want to get into a relationship with somebody that you don't like, right? I mean, you wouldn't choose a boyfriend or a girlfriend whom you're like, I hate this person, but let me just go get into a relationship with them for 7 years. Or you won't even go where you'll say, oh, this one, so famous, I will get into a relationship with them for 7 years, right? That's not how you choose your real world relationships. Why would you do that for something which is going to impact to a large extent your entire career, right? So essentially, when you sort of are deciding on an advisor, you want to be extra careful about whom do you get into that relationship with. And the role of an advisor from a largely idealistic perspective is that of an advisor. I personally hate the word supervisor, right? Because that has a connotation where somebody's kind of watching over you, right? I mean, I'm supervising this person. I personally like the word advisor better because that has a more pastoral sense to it, right? I mean, I'm an advisor. I'm going to help you advise, help you get to whatever it is that you want to do, whatever it is that you are doing your PhD for. I'm going to help you get to those goals that you got into that this PhD program, right? So again, one of the mentalities that sort of students come out from an undergraduate program is, oh, tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? And that is a mentality that everybody has to kind of get out of if you want to be a successful sort of or do a successful PhD and eventually be a successful, let's say you want to have an academic role after that. You want to sort of be or look at your advisor as somebody who's advising you in a more pastoral sense than somebody who's assigning you tasks to do on a day-to-day basis, which is fine, right? I mean, the earlier points in the PhD, it's perfectly fine. But in the long term, it's better to think about your advisors as advisors and not taskmasters, right? This is a question that no advisor wants to hear, especially from senior PhD students, right? You have a meeting with advisor and then you're like, अच्छा वो जो आपने बताया था वो तो मैंने कर दिया, अब मैं क्या करूं? नहीं, right? The right way to approach this is, आपने मुझको ये बताया था, ये 4 चीजें मैंने और कर दी हैं, right? And इसमें से these 2 things that have worked out, these 3 things that don't work out, and based on my experience so far, this is the line of inquiry that I'm going to pursue. Right? So the idea there is that, again, don't treat your advisors as taskmasters who are going to tell you what it is that you want to do, but try to take initiative, again, goes back to ownership about being your PhD, so on and so forth, right? So again, don't go to your advisor with, tell me what to do, but go to them with, this is what I have done, and let's see if this is something that can pan out into something which is worthwhile inquiring further or not. Right? Okay, who's been here? I've been here. Right? I've been this guy who saw the advisor sort of walking the corridors like, crap, he's here today. I will go that way. Right? I'm pretty sure if I've had that experience, I mean, quite a large fraction of you guys have had that experience as well. Right? It's like, okay, अरे यार उसने वो बोला था करने को 4 दिन हो गए मैंने अभी तक तो कुछ किया नहीं, So maybe if he doesn't see me, he will forget, right? He will not forget. What he will become is mad, right? He'll say, oh, I told him to do this. Or, again, I'm using more, male pronouns, but then again, that's how it's coming out. But again, the idea is, don't be this person, right? I mean, if you had a meeting with your advisor, just go do that. Have a meeting. Communication is the key, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether or not you were able to do something that you had promised or not. But at the end of the day, what really matters is whether your advisor knows that you are, one, working towards what it is that you're supposed to be working on, and two, at least making some progress. So then progress here is kind of undefinable, because in the PhD program, trying out a whole bunch of experiments and failing is also progress, right? And you don't have to do those experiments again, those won't work. But then again, until and unless you communicate back to your advisor that this is what I have been doing for the past 2 weeks, and these are 1,000 experiments that I have tried in the ones that have failed, they'll have no idea that this is what you've been working towards, right? So again, don't run away from your advisors, meet them frequently, communicate with them more frequently in terms of what it is that you have been doing, right? And again, as I said, no relationship can survive without communication. That happens in personal relationships, that happens in professional relationships as well. And make no mistake, an advisor-advisee relationship is a professional one, right? So make sure you meet with them, make sure you communicate with them, right? Don't be this person. And I don't even know which person is this. Is this the person on the left or the person on the right? But anyways, do not, right? Absolute worst thing that you could potentially do, right? If you see your advisor and this is something that's like, okay, I should have met him, a week ago, it's okay. Go have a conversation with them. Most people are reasonable, right? I mean, contrary to popular belief, most people are reasonable. You give them a good explanation, people will believe you. Until unless they have a very good reason to not believe you, they will believe you, right? So, but that's not going to happen until unless you have that conversation and tell them, okay, this is what I have been up to. So, again, if you see your advisor, if you see your DSC member, and you haven't met them for a while, you are going to schedule that presentation, you are going to schedule or send them that write-up, that's okay. Just make sure you don't run away, right? Don't be this person. All right. Let's see. Okay. Right. So, all of us have been here as well. Okay. I have a deadline coming up, right? The advisor is like, I need to read what you've written, right? I have, you're a second-year PhD student. I have zero confidence in your writing capabilities. Give me a draft 3 weeks before. मैं दे दूंगा. Okay. I have no reason to not believe anybody, right? Then all of a sudden, 2 days before the deadline is supposed, or we are supposed to submit the paper, and then all of a sudden the advisor wakes up and is like, whoa, there was supposed to be a draft in my inbox 3 weeks ago. Where is it? And I was like, oh, acha nahi. I completely forgot about that, right? It's okay. It's okay to write a bad draft and send it out to your advisor for feedback than to not send anything at all, right? I mean, that's terrible. It's okay. It's bad English. That's okay. Nobody sort of is born with perfect grammar. All of us learn it, right? I remember the first time I gave a talk, which was in the winter, in the American winter of 2006. I was wearing a half jacket in a cold room and I was sweating. I mean, I was sweating, like physically sweating. There were teardrops or sweat drops falling down my forehead. That was because I was so damn nervous, right? So the point I'm trying to say is, nobody is born with presentation skills, writing skills, whatever it is. The only way we get to be good is by doing it again and again, right? And until unless you send out the draft to your advisor, roughly around the days that they had asked for it. They can't give you feedback in time. That essentially means you can't rewrite your draft. That essentially means you're not going to get good at writing. If you're doing a PhD, presentation and writing skills are core skills that you have to develop, right? I mean, of course, you have to develop skills in research in the area that you're working in, but writing and presenting is essentially something that you have to develop as well. If you're even going to think about having a academic career of any sort, right? So, please make sure that you think about, One, setting realistic deadlines. Right? I mean, that's sort of like the side kind of message that I want to send from this is that goes back to make your expectations realistic. You have a good sense of what your capabilities are. You know how much you can write in a given day, in a given week, in a given fortnight. So plan out whatever it is that you have to send out to your advisor, to whoever it is. Make sure you deliver what you promise, or at least some portion of it, right? There's a very old saying which essentially goes under promise and over deliver, right? So you say, okay, I'm going to give you this much, but you give them that much, and that keeps everybody happy, right? But then again, there are some trade-offs associated there that I'm not going to get into there, right? Okay. This is again coming back to my my thing about advisor and advisee relationships, right? One of the things that you have to sort of be able to communicate with your advisor is also their expectations from you. A good advisor would communicate what you could expect from them, but then many times people don't communicate what you or they expect from you, right? So if they don't explicitly sort of have a conversation with you about this is what I expect from you as a PhD student and however long you're going to be around, it's always a good idea to sort of sit down and get their expectations straight, right? Because if you don't, let's say your advisor's expectations are, I expect you to write 2 nature neuroscience papers. I'll pick on nature neuroscience in one another talk because that's another talk by itself. But let's say your advisor says, I want you to write 2 first author nature neuroscience papers, but they never bother to tell you that. And you never bother to ask them that. Now you're 5 years in and you have 0 nature neuroscience papers. Right? And the institution says, well, if you don't graduate in another 6 months, we're going to stop paying you. Right? That's a tricky situation to be in. And all of that could potentially have been avoided if from day one you had sort of a sense that, okay, I mean, the least I have to do to be able to graduate is write 2 nature neuroscience papers as first author. Anyways, the point is, make sure that you communicate with your advisor and you are able to get a sense of their expectations out of you, right? Because I mean, PhD programs are typically very open-ended in the sense that it's not like a BTech program, it's not like an MSc program where you have, okay, do these many courses, do these many, or write this paper and or a small thesis or project report, and you can graduate. So every department is different, every advisor is different, every institution is different. Everybody has different expectations. Until unless you have a good sense of what those expectations are, you won't be able to meet them in the time that you have, which is 5 or 6 years, right? Okay. Your advisors are counting on you, right? This is one thing that PhD students don't sort of know much, but it takes a lot of time and effort to get grant money. I am not kidding. Right? It takes a lot of time and effort to get that grant money, and we are counting on you to be able to help us deliver whatever it is that we promised to the funding agency, right? I mean, it's hard enough to get money out of funding agencies. Everybody over here can vouch for that. But we are counting on you to help us deliver whatever it is that was promised to the funding agencies. So there are expectations set of advisors from PhD students, and until unless there is communication involved, you won't be able to sort of meet them. Right? Okay. This is one other thing, right? I mean, we all have this notion, at least in system software. We have this notion, if I build this, this nice piece of software that I have thought about, and I put it out there, people will start using it. Nobody will start using it, right? I mean, there are so many open source GitHub projects that are just lying there, right? So, one of the things that you have to develop as a PhD student is you need to be able to develop the skills that would convince people of the ideas that you are proposing, right? So to be able to convince people of your ideas, people whom you have never met before, people whom you have never talked to before, these are the sort of reviewers that will sort of read your papers and comment about how original the idea is and whether this work is worth publishing or not. These are the people who are going to judge your work. And again, you have no idea who these people are and what mood are they going to be in when they're going to be reviewing your paper. Which essentially means that if you want them to be convinced of the idea that you have, which is in the paper that you have put down, you want to make sure that they actually are convinced, which essentially can only be done by good writing, right? So one of the things that you have to make sure that you develop over the course of a PhD is the ability to write well, right? Because there are tons and tons, ridiculous amount of bad papers out there. We are producing papers by the gazillion that everybody is printing, but nobody is reading, right? So badly written papers are a waste of everyone's time. First of all, you waste your time, whatever little amount it is, to write a bad paper, right? Then you waste somebody else's time who's going to review that paper and get mad and say, this is a terrible paper, what a waste of my time, right? You are going to give a badly written draft to your advisor who's going to read it and say, what a waste of my time, right? So there are 3 people at least, or if there are more reviewers, let's say 3 reviewers, 5 people whose time has been wasted and nothing's really come out of it just because there was not enough work put into writing the paper well, which essentially was needed to convince the people that your idea is worthwhile. Right? So a lot of these things can potentially be solved if there is enough effort put into writing the paper. Right? I've had this reaction so many times I have lost count. Right? I pick up something, and this is not something that people that I have worked with have written, but I have just been on committees that have had papers that were submitted with people's name on them. No less. This was not like a double blind thing where I didn't know who had written that crappy paper. I know exactly who's written that crappy paper, and people were still like, no, let me take my chances and submit this badly written paper. Anyways, right? Don't be this person. You have to take enough pride in your work to not submit bad papers. Just make sure that whatever it is that you write is something that somebody else who's going to spend 1 to 5 hours reading your paper is going to come out on the other side having learned something. And this is something, and again, if you're able to just do 2 things within your PhD, which is the ability to write well and the ability to present well, and you don't do much else, let's say, in the worst case scenario, you don't do much else, there are still a lot of career options that you could sort of explore with just these 2 skills. Like in today's world, so many opportunities open up just because you can write well, you can present well, you can take a 20-pager that you have no idea from before and summarize it well for a lay audience, let's say. But I'm not even talking about science communication, right? All of these large corporations, McKinsey or whatever, a lot of these analysts do actually just that, right? They read these 200-page reports and try and summarize that knowledge into 5 PowerPoint slides, right? And they make a lot of money. So the point is, being able to write well, being able to sort of present well is a core skill that is kind of very much required of you from a PhD program. Right? Okay, this is another thing. All of us, especially in India, are very bad at writing. And again, I'm going to keep harping on writing because it's become sort of like a pet peeve of mine for the past couple of years. But anyways, I've been here, right? Again, all of this comes from personal experience in some form or the other, right? Either I have been the one doing some of this, or I have been on the receiving end of some of this. So all of this comes from personal experience. But the idea here is that none of us have, at least I didn't have the capability to be able to write even remotely well when I started out. But then again, one of the things that I would say is, idea matter करता है, idea तो मेरा बहुत ही बढ़िया है. I will write this paper the day before the deadline. I will write, and I could write a 10-page paper the day before the deadline, but then it goes back to, it's a waste of time, right? However good my idea was, it doesn't matter if I'm not able to convince the other person who's going to read that idea and say, well, okay, it's a great idea, right? So if you want to submit something which is worthwhile reading, which is worth other people's time, you have to start writing early. And when I say early, much earlier than the deadline when it's supposed to be submitted, right? Okay. This is, again, sorry, I have a lot of slides on writing. It seems like I didn't realize that when I was sort of making these slides. But anyways, the idea is, don't use big words, right? I mean, when you're writing, you are writing to make sure that the person who's going to read it understands what you're writing, right? There is no need to use 5-syllable words just to sound smart if I can do the exact same job in a syllable, right? It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. And actually, I take that as a personal compliment if somebody comes and tells me, your paper was extremely simple. I was like, thank you, you're my best friend now, right? Write so that your papers also have pedagogical value, right? You're not just generating new knowledge, but think about you're also explaining it to some fourth-year BTech who's going to sort of start into this line of research that you're currently in, right? You don't want them to be more confused than they already were when they started reading your paper, right? You want them to have a bit more clarity after they have read your paper. So papers have pedagogical value in addition to being something that generates new knowledge. Make sure that when you're writing to help people understand, unlike a lot of op-ed pieces that I read in the newspapers these days. It's like I read them and I'm like, okay, I'm no wiser than I was 20 minutes ago for a 1,000-word op-ed piece. Anyways, how do you get good at writing? There is no trick to it. You just keep writing, right? Just write. It doesn't matter if it's bad. Sit down half an hour every day, write whatever it is. Do a brain dump. The only way to get better at writing is you write something, then you iterate, then you iterate, then you iterate. The more you write, the more iterations that you do early on, the less iterations that you'll have to do later on, right? I mean, if you have to do 20 iterations in your second year, and if you keep doing this again and again, by the time you get to your 6th year, you'll have to do 2 iterations, maybe 3 iterations before you submit the paper, and that's the best you could hope for. Even today, we all do 3 to 5 iterations before we submit a half-decent paper, right? I'm not talking about like a super solid polished piece of work. The only way to get good at things is just practicing. One of the things that you'll do in PhD programs is, again, submit a lot of papers which are going to be subject to peer review, right? And peer review is a double-edged sword. It's not perfect, as many people would like you to believe. There are inherent problems with peer review, and many times you'll get reviews like this. Right? Like, oh, what is new in this? I have seen this idea 20 times before. I work in memory systems every time, and I worked at a company that did memory systems, and every time I went to a fellow, the company fellow that I was working with, like, oh, we did this in 1985. We did this in 1987. Like, okay, but anyways, the point is, you will get a lot of these kind of feedback where people will not be convinced of your ideas. And there could be multiple reasons for this, right? It could be because you didn't write it well. It could be because you didn't do the literature survey well, and there was actually an idea out there that resembled very much of what you were trying to do. But anyways, peer review is the best we have, and it isn't perfect, right? And when it works, it does work. Most of the time it does work. And when it does work, it helps you sort of understand things better, right? I mean, you had a certain set of assumptions in your mind using which you wrote that paper, and it turns out those assumptions were not true because reviewer pointed those out, right? So it does work in many of the cases, and that's how we've been able to sustain science for this long. One of the things that you'll also get a lot of in your PhD program is rejections. So many rejections. I mean, not just PhD program. If you choose an academic life, 90% of the stuff that you'll ever submit is going to be rejected. But I mean, that happens even today. So there are more rejections in academic life than I don't know any other sort of field that I know of. And rejections hurt, right? I mean, if you're starting out, the first rejection that you'll ever experience is going to be something that you're going to remember for a very long time. But over time, things get a little easier. But you will have a lot of rejections, and the idea is to be able to take those in your stride and be able to do a little better than what you were doing before, right? There would be so many reasons to celebrate as well. There would be papers that you would have gone through a number of revise and resubmit cycles, and they would eventually be accepted, and there would be a lot of reasons to celebrate these things as well. In any of these situations, whether it be the happy one or whether it be the sad one, remember, your author-reviewer relationship is a professional one. So don't, in a moment of, I don't know, madness, try to write a snide remark to in your rebuttal and say, you don't know anything. This is the best paper that I have ever written, the best idea to come out of this part of the world in the history of mankind, whatever. Just always be professional in your handlings with whoever it is that you're going to be handling with during your PhD program. All right. Presentations, right? Like I said, presentations are something that, one, are absolutely essential skills for you to have before you graduate. You should be able to sort of do presentations pretty much at a moment's notice, like I kind of have done it since yesterday. But the only way to get good at presentations is the same thing as writing. The more of them you do it, the more or the better you will become at these things, right? This is something that I heard from Matt Might, who used to be a computer science professor, but now does research in rare diseases. Right? So he made this hard transition from formal logic to essentially computational biology of sorts, from what I remember. And this is what he said once that I remember: every talk is a job talk. Any talk that you ever give, there would be somebody in the audience who is going to be sort of remembering what it is that you are saying. Is it? Okay. I'll keep that in mind. So that's why there's an asterisk. That goes to the end of the talk and says, well, I'm open for hire or whatever. Anyways, the point is, make sure any presentation that is being done for an external audience, you make sure that you are you have honed it well enough such that if this was to be a job talk, you are not going to be embarrassed from this presentation. Right? Okay, so let me just quickly point over some general nuggets. I kind of glanced over the main part of the talk. Some more things that I'll quickly sort of say, which are useful pieces of advice. At least I think so. Take them as you want to. But if you are in PhD program and you have the opportunity to attend talks outside of your research area, please do that. Go to as many talks as you can. If you are in engineering, go to humanities talks. If you are humanities, go to engineering or sciences talks. Just helps you broaden your horizons, helps you connect whatever it is that you're doing to possibly real world. And it's okay, right? I mean, if you are in CS and you work in systems, you go to theory talks. If you're in theory, you go to systems talks. Just helps you understand things a little better. Networking, right? Anytime you attend conferences, make sure you go and talk to people. And it's not a natural skill for most people. It was not a natural skill for me. I mean, I would rather sit in the corner and drink chai than go and talk to somebody that I don't know. And it's quite frankly a little scary at times, especially if you haven't done it before. I mean, what do I talk to them about? Do I tell them about my research, or do I just have like a friendly one-on-one conversation with them? And it's become especially difficult if this person is somebody who's like a big name in your field, right? I mean, so how do I approach them? And it's perfectly fine, right? I mean, you go talk to them as a person, you don't have, or you try not to have too many expectations from that conversation, but at least try to strike up a conversation. To give you a data point from my own personal experiences, every interview that I have gotten to date is because, somebody got me that interview. Somebody I knew got me that interview. I applied to 200 jobs after I graduated from PhD. I got 0 interviews. I passed around my resume 8 times. I got 5 interviews, right? And that only happened because, I'm not saying I'm a great networker. I was a crappy networker, but still that network kind of worked out for me. So what I'm saying is, if you have the opportunity to go out and network, use that, because that's going to help out later on. If you write code, comment it, right? I kid you not, this was my actual email signature for 5 years, right? And I'm kind of ashamed to admit it in person right now, but what the hell? This is a terrible attitude to have. If you're writing code, comment it right then and there. If you write 5 lines of code, write 10 lines of comments, because believe it or not, doesn't matter how good a programmer you think you are, 6 months down the line, you're not going to remember any of what you wrote or why you wrote it, right? So these days, I write more documentation than I write code, but that's a different sad story that we'll sort of talk about some other time, right? If you're working with data, release your tools and data, right? I mean, if if you can release both, that is essentially the best case scenario, right? This is something that is going to help out people and this is how science is supposed to progress as well, right? I mean, you do something, people do something on top of that. There is no point in doing something and keeping it within the confines of your own private GitHub repository. Release whatever you have, and before you release whatever you have, make sure you're not going to be embarrassed about whatever it is that you are going to put out there on GitHub, because the internet never forgets, right? Every once in a while, if you have the opportunity to participate in an ambitious project, a lot of the times we do incremental stuff, and that's perfectly fine. All of us do. If you have the opportunity to participate in large-scale ambitious projects, go and try and sort of pick those if you can, because the kind of learning experiences that you're going to have from those large-scale projects, you might not be able to do or not be able to do in the ones that you are doing incrementally, right? Again, there's only so much that you can do by yourself, right? I mean, you're just one person. Good engineering research, good large-scale basic science research is something that can only be done collaboratively. There is just no other way. One of the many reasons why we have not been able to do sort of large-scale projects from the subcontinent is because we have not been able to build large-scale collaborations across the country. You go look at Europe, you go look at America, they have all of these large sort of country research groups that are working together, right? Very few of those exist in India so far. And that's one of the many reasons why, big large-scale science or engineering breakthroughs have kind of not come out of India so far. So collaborate. If you want to do something which is going to have large-scale impact, collaborate. Find collaborators that you can work with. It's okay to sort of mix or try out and not work with somebody just because you don't have the right wavelength with them, but that's perfectly fine. But do collaborate. That is the only way you'll be able to do large-scale good work, right? Think about the next paper that you want to write. Just because there is something that you have that can be converted into a paper doesn't necessarily mean that it should be written, right? So, as I said before, and again, this is becoming a bit of a pet peeve with mine, which is essentially we are writing just too many papers, right? I don't know if we need to be writing so many papers these days, but that's, again, another story. But just sort of keep in mind whether this is a paper that kind of needs to be written, whether it's adding, does it have pedagogical value? Is it filling an actual gap in the knowledge that was there before, right? One of the other general pieces of advice, to keep you mentally and physically sane, make sure you do some sort of physical activity. Don't just give up and be a couch potato of sorts. Hostel to lab, lab to hostel is not going to cut it, right? I mean, your mental output is very much in direct proportion to your physical well-being and your mental well-being as well, right? So सबके लिए, हाँ? Oh, अच्छा, हाँ, नहीं, ठीक, हाँ. Okay. Finally, just a couple of things, and I think I'm kind of running out of my time as well. If you communicate your research, it helps you understand things better, right? I mean, if you are able to explain, so one of my professors at BHU used to say, if you can explain what it is that you teach or what it is that you do research on to your grandmother, then you actually understand it. At that time, I thought, what the hell, what does that even mean? 20 years down the line, I know he was actually onto something, right? So try and see if you can communicate your science, whatever research that it is that you do, to lay people. One, because a lot of the research that we do is kind of built on public money. So it's sort of our responsibility to communicate whatever it is that we're doing, especially if you are doing it using public money. And it just helps you think through things, right? I mean, abstract out the details that you do have to take care of on a daily basis for the research and help it present to general audiences better, right? Okay. So, in summary, and I think I'm just here in the nick of time, if you take nothing out of this talk, here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things. 9 things that you should think about sort of honing up right? As far as having a good experience in your PhD is concerned. Again, as I said, it's your PhD, you need to take responsibility, and you have to think about what it is that you are going to do before you start doing it. Use your advisor as an advisor and not as a taskmaster who essentially assigns you tasks to do. Communication matters with your lab, with your advisor, with the reviewers, whatever it is. Make sure you are able to communicate whatever it is doing, whatever it is you're not doing, as quickly as you're able to do it. Soft skills, reading, writing, are going to help you get or open up a lot more employment opportunities outside of academia and industry if that is kind of your cup of tea. Practice when it comes to writing as well as presenting. There's only so much you can do yourself. You're only one person. In order to be able to do large scale, big impact science, you should be able to collaborate, work with some of the more ambitious long-term projects that are going. But overall, you need to have fun, right? I mean, I might sound a little cynical on my Twitter timeline anyways, just because I keep picking on things. But I had a great time during my PhD. I had no qualms about it. I had a great advisor. I had a great research group. I had the best 6 years that I spent as a PhD student, right? And one of the reasons why I gave up a job in the industry was because that's what kept coming back to me, right? How much fun I had in academia as a PhD student. That's why I sort of came back to academia to some extent, right? So, before I finish with the last slide, I thought I'd just create one thing just for this audience, and this is all I have for now. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them, but I don't know if you'd have any questions.
I have lots.
Is it? Okay. All right. No questions mean either I gave an excellent talk, everybody understood everything and there are no questions, or it means nobody understood anything and I should go back to the last slide as my last slide and not this one.
Just coming out of the switching of video mode. So
Oh, is it? Okay.
So they're not talking about some dance classes or something.
Oh, is it? Okay.
After 2 years.
You talk about the imposter syndrome, let's say.
Huh.
So let's say our Indian students, or
Huh.
let's say anywhere,
Huh.
they read these complicated papers. You're mentioning about them, poorly written, let's say, poorly sophisticated, and they feel unsafe now, like what
Huh.
must be like.
Right.
So any inputs for that?
I don't know if I have any inputs to that, but I don't think we ever get rid of the imposter syndrome. I personally haven't been able to get rid of the imposter syndrome, right? Every time, one thing that I've been able to do so far, and again, I don't think it's advice, is essentially realize or be able to locate or pinpoint a badly written paper. Earlier, I used to think that it's my fault that I'm not understanding something, but at least now I know that it's a badly written paper. And that has only come because I have been, I essentially try to write good papers, again, try, right? And I have been over the years reading a lot of these papers that I sort of somewhat have an idea that, what a badly written paper or an overly complicated paper kind of looks like. But I don't know how to get rid of. But there are obviously certain papers that are, sometimes you can't just get rid of the complication. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but this is what I have.
So I was just wondering, a lot of pictures that you were showing in the meme, or does it matter? Was the actual dialogue said in that movie or show? Can I just pick whatever? Because a lot of pictures I have not seen, the images that you were showing. So I might as well pick some picture and write whatever the heck that I want.
Oh, no, these are like actual stills from the movie or serial or whatever.
I'm saying,
How?
So is
How-
it
but-
okay to do that, or is it like it is not a good thing?
I think the idea is to be able to sort of take something that has actually happened and fit some other situation onto that situation, and that's what creates a meme.
Exactly match.
No, not really. So the dialogue is what was said in the movie or the serial, but then you superimpose some other experience from academia or wherever. As far as I know, I'm pretty sure there are genres where people are doing that, but
And how do putting all of these things, is it okay? I mean, they don't say, oh, आपने हमारी photo उठा ली.
so far no. But that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, lot of this is just freely available on the internet, so I just copy paste. But there might be copyright issues that I might not be aware of.
You have not. What is this new thing?
So this is some user who's created this GIF. So this one user on Twitter has created a lot of these GIFs from Indian movies.
Oh, so you haven't picked up a movie and then taken.
Oh no. So these are no. So these are already created. Either the screenshots or the GIFs or whatever. Everything is kind of there, and then you take something that seems interesting and superimpose like an academic.
Can you do that? Can you take a movie and then?
Yeah, I mean, you can. I don't know the legality of it though. Yeah.
तो आपने कर धंधा करो तो बड़ा
हाँ
मुझे लगा एच हटा सकते हो
ओ अच्छा वो तो किसी और ने बनाया सो
मतलब
हाँ
धंधा करो तो
ओ
बड़ा
अच्छा क्या करे आई सी
because this was interesting I was just thinking you were saying all of these things to be good. Essentially, one could say, there is this guy called PhD Comics.
Yeah.
He's essentially, putting it back on the advisor.
Yeah.
So, ऐसा कोई channel है जो meet students is saying to the advisor या तो
देखा तो नहीं अभी तक I haven't seen
it's a
it.
good opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. Quick questions. You can probably still catch Manu when I'm leaving.
I'm around.
You're around. Okay, cool. So, you catch Manu outside in the wild in the meantime. Thank you so much for that.